Everyone has done something they aren't too fond of, but not all mistakes are created equal.
Because I will never allow someone to talk to me like that.
In this case, you could argue that Mark Wahlberg's mistakes were just plain cruel and bizarre, especially for such a wildly praised, high-profile actor. During the summer of 2020, our beloved Marky Mark had made a post dedicated to George Floyd's death, which, as you probably know, reignited the whole Black Lives Matter movement, leading to protests all over the world. As innocent as that may all sound, Mark was hit with a tsunami of backlash, not necessarily for posting about racial injustices, but due to the racial injustices he himself had committed way back when. Comments under his post were filled with testimonies, wiki links, and other receipts of his disturbing past incidents that consisted of, ironically enough, racial violence against Black children and towards Asians. Matter of fact, the acts he committed before he became the Marky Mark were so severe, it had allegedly left one of his victims blind in one eye. What could possibly go wrong when you combine drugs, racism, and youth? By the looks of Mark's career? Well, it could make you a global superstar. Let's dive deeper into Mark Wahlberg's oddly disturbing past. We all know Mark Wahlberg today as being a semi-conservative, religious family man who continues to be respected as a longtime perfectionist of his craft in the wonderful world of acting. But before we knew him as that one guy besides Ted, the bear, or before he became a recognized face starring in movies like Training Day, Uncharted, The Basketball Diaries, and a yeep load of others, he was first introduced to us not through acting, but via music. Remember Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch? The early 90s hip-hop group consisted of a young Mark as leading man and went on to score their biggest hit to date with Good Vibrations that had the MTV network, before it turned into a faux reality TV jungle and a chokehold. This period in Mark's life was surely one he'd never forget, and he was surely feeling himself as any young 21-year-old would. He was the moment, with Good Vibrations blowing up, eventually taking over the #1 spot on Billboard's Hot 100 in the year 1991. What followed after was a domino effect of success and monumental moments that'll serve as a case origin for his career throughout the years. His iconic Calvin Klein ad that'd be used as a meme before memes were even a thing, and be served as inspo time and time again for others and their Calvin Klein shoots, example being Nick Jonas's, also served as a springboard for Mark's future endeavors. His boyish charm paired with his I don't give a F attitude put Mark on the map as a teen idol and overall heartthrob, and his reputation for being somewhat of a bad boy also aided in his overall appeal. Although somewhat of a bad boy is a severe understatement, Mark was a wild youngin. Contrary to his more wholesome image nowadays, teenage Mark was a riot, and not in a good way. He dabbled in drugs by the age of 13. Cocaine, being his substance of choice, was arrested numerous times and convicted of a felony. Despite his laundry list of charitable work and overall activism, teenage Mark had been responsible for several wild hate crimes back in his city of Dorchester, Boston, in the late 80s. And when I say wild, I do mean wild. Although his hip-hop group consisted of several Black men being utilized as backup props, in the 90s, Mark wasn't too fond of quote-unquote the blacks. During a 1986 incident, Wahlberg and friends took it upon themselves to throw rocks and other objects at a group of 10, 11-year-old Black children, all whilst yelling racial slurs like "kill the N-words." The entire incident remained active until an ambulance finally intervened. If that isn't wild enough, it wouldn't be a whole 42 hours till Mark and his friends, were back at it again with their shenanigans. The next day, not next Tuesday, but the next day, they'd get caught harassing another group of majority Black children at a beach, even going as far as to gather other white men to join in on the racial abuse. throwing rocks at them as well. Mark ultimately was found guilty of violating the civil rights of his victims, and a civil rights injunction was issued against him and 2 of his friends. The case was settled the next month. As absolutely trifling as those cases were, this next page of hate crimes and the What Race Will Mark Wahlberg Attack Next novel is far more severe. On April 8, 1988, a measly 2 years after being served with a civil rights injunction, shopkeeper Tran Lam and passerby Johnny Tran were doing what they do, minding their own businesses, when they were blindly and viciously attacked by a then 17-year-old Wahlberg and Company. The attack came after Mark had attempted to steal beer from the shopkeeper. Tran Lam was leaving his car, carrying 2 cases, and as he crossed the sidewalk, Tran was blindsided by a blow to his head by none other than Marky Mark himself. Carrying a large 5-foot-long wooden stick, Mark had approached Tran, called him a Vietnam effing shit, before proceeding to beat him over the head with his weapon of choice. This knocked Tran Lam off his feet, landing on the ground, and eventually became unconscious due to the merciless blows. He was beaten so severely that the stick had actually broken into 2. The altercation alerted others who'd alert the police, and Mark fled the scene. Several blocks away, and oblivious to the madness occurring not too far from him, Vietnamese War veteran Johnny Tran was startled when Mark ran up on him. Placing his arm around Tran's shoulder, Mark whisper-shouted, police coming, let me hide," which Tran, utterly confused, allowed him to do. After the police had cruised past Johnny and the questionable teen playing hide-and-seek behind him, Mark decided to thank Johnny by giving him a good old punch right in Tran's left eye, causing the now 2nd Wahlberg assault victim to fall to the ground. When the police finally decided to spin the block, they noticed Tran, who later identified Mark as the person of interest who had assaulted him. Mark was eventually placed under arrest and proceeded to self-snitch by confessing that Tran Lam was in fact the man he had beaten over the head. He also proceeded to make numerous unsolicited racial remarks about gooks, slant-eyed gooks, and more. It's been reported that Mark was high off the sauce, including alcohol and other drugs known as phencyclidine, or PCP. He was also carrying a small amount of marijuana and eventually charged with attempted murder, but ended up pleading guilty to a felony assault given the excuse of him being heavily intoxicated at the time, and insisted on the random assaults not being racially motivated, even though he literally used racial slurs during and after the attacks. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but his sentence was cut short, ultimately only spending a total of 45 days. Some may try to argue that Mark's racially provoked attacks throughout his teen years was the result of him being young, dumb, and misguided, although most can vouch that racism and violence does not come in the teen contract. After his prison stint, and well into his early 20s, he'd get himself involved in many other fights and somehow avoided even more assault charges. You'd think fame and status would help him clean up his act, but it only made him more appealing. To a certain audience, that is. On the set of the Three Kings movie, actor George Clooney would routinely find Mark involved in barroom brawls on a nightly basis. Back in '93, he allegedly called a member of Madonna's little entourage a slur for gay people. You know, the one that rhymes with maggot. At a party Madonna herself was hosting, which would end up being the same party she very publicly threw him out of. With age comes maturity, hopefully. As Marky Mark became older, he'd eventually drop his violent antics altogether. Now a father, husband, and devout Christian, Mark seems to have been able to stay out of trouble over the past few decades. In 2014, he sought a pardon from the Massachusetts State Parole Board in order to expunge his past convictions. The motive behind the sudden pardon was due to his convictions preventing him from being involved in law enforcement-related activities, including those that assist at-risk youth. Another reason given, and the one that made people scrunch their lips to the side, was a want for a concessionaire's license for his restaurant business. the burger chain Wahlburgers. In his plea for clemency, Mark insisted that he has turned his life around through faith, hard work, and guidance from some incredible mentors, attending church almost daily. He refers to the charitable foundation he set up in 2001, which he says has raised about $9.6 million, and insists that he hasn't engaged in philanthropic efforts in order to make people forget about his past. To the contrary, I want people to remember my past so that I can serve as an example of how lives can be turned around and how people can be redeemed. He also claims that some reports about his past mischiefs have been misreported. During a 2006 interview with ABC News, he confessed to not trying to find the people he had assaulted to make amends, but that he was no longer burdened by the guilt. You have to go and ask for forgiveness, and it wasn't until I really started doing good and doing right by other people as well as myself that I really started to feel that guilt go away. So I don't have a problem going to sleep at night. I feel good when I wake up in the morning. He also wants you to know that he doesn't feel entitled to the pardon due to his celebrity status, but genuinely wants to be a positive influence for kids growing up in communities similar to the one he grew up in, one where kids may have all odds against them. Although the subject regarding his supposed pardon was met with backlash, mainly from Asian activist groups who argue that Mark himself had never sought forgiveness from his victims and that the action of seeking a pardon within itself disrespects all of them. Although no one has the right to tell anyone how to feel about injustices concerning them or their communities or racial backgrounds, I think we can all agree that no one's opinion matters more than the actual victims involved. After Johnny Tran was tracked down by Daily Mail online, he admitted to not realizing the man who had assaulted him all those years ago went on to become a world-renowned actor. In regards to the pardon, Johnny himself expressed that he would like to see Mark pardoned and that he should not have a crime he had committed in his youth be held over him any longer, going on to say that Mark paid for his crimes when he went to prison. After Johnny's interview, an associate of Mark's contacted the Tran family, who had agreed to be flown out to LA, all expenses paid for, plus food, mind you, in order to meet Mark face to face. During the meetup, Mark was relieved to know that the injury sustained to Tran's left eye wasn't the result of his blow after all, but of a grenade that had detonated back in Vietnam. Over the years, Mark has proven himself to be a devoted Christian family man. He even thinks that gay people should be allowed to marry, a complete 360 from his ideology in the past. The internet may never forget, but if his own victims can forgive him, why can't we? It's safe to say that Marky Mark is no more and has blossomed into the Mark Wahlberg we all know today. Whoever that may be, well, that's entirely up to you. Are you surprised by Mark's disturbing past? Let us know your thoughts and opinions down below in the comments, and stay tuned for more true celebrity stories.